I grew up in Fairfield Hills, Connecticut, where lawns were trimmed to perfection and success was measured in college pennants and country club memberships. My mother, Eleanor Calloway, had once been a society columnist, the kind of woman who could make or break reputations with a single paragraph. She carried herself like she was still on deadline, scanning every room for imperfections, especially if those imperfections were me. My sister, Victoria, was everything my mother had ever wanted in a daughter. She graduated from Yale Law, clerked for a federal judge, and was on track to make partner before 30. At every holiday dinner, there was a new headline about her, sometimes literally, because Mother clipped the articles and framed them on the dining room wall. I was the afterthought at those gatherings, seated at the far end of the table next to the younger cousins, fielding questions about how school was going even after I'd dropped out. When I said I was building websites for small businesses, someone would chuckle and call it cute, like I was selling lemonade on the corner. Victoria would glance at me with a patient smile, the kind reserved for someone you expect will eventually grow out of their silly phase. From the time I was 12, I knew I didn't want the life they were pushing. I'd rather take apart an old computer than dress for a networking luncheon. I loved the puzzle of code, the thrill of seeing something I built work for the first time. My mother called it playing around. My father, less subtle, asked if I planned to keep tinkering with gadgets until I was 40, by the time I was in my early 20s. The gap between us was more than taste. It was a fault line. They measured worth in degrees and titles. I measured it in ideas and the freedom to chase them. Still, I kept trying to be polite, to fit into their world without fully disappearing into it. That illusion finally shattered one Sunday evening. At a dinner I'll never forget, when the space between us became impossible to ignore. The table was set with Eleanor's best china, the kind she only used when there was an audience. Crystal glasses sparkled under the chandelier, and the air smelled faintly of her signature roast chicken. Relatives filled every seat, conversations flowing about new promotions, Ivy League acceptances, and Victoria's latest court victory. I'd been quiet all evening, waiting for my turn to speak. When the plates were cleared for dessert, I set down my fork and said, "I'm not going back to Columbia next semester." The clink of silverware stopped. I'm focusing full-time on my business. I already have paying clients and a plan to scale. For a beat. No one moved. Then Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "Your business," she repeated, as if tasting something spoiled. "Is that what you call those little websites you play with? They're not little. They bring in revenue. And her hand slammed the table. "Get out, you lowlife." The words sliced through the room like broken glass. A cousin coughed into his napkin. Victoria's lips curved into a knowing smirk. I felt the heat crawl up my neck but kept my voice steady. "If that's how you see me, then I will." I stood, the legs of my chair scraping against the polished floor. No one tried to stop me. No one asked me to explain. Upstairs, I packed quickly laptop, a few clothes, my worn leather backpack. Each item I stuffed inside felt like a piece of the life I'd been quietly building behind their backs. When I came down with my things, Eleanor didn't look up from pouring coffee. My father murmured something to a guest, as if the scene unfolding in his home was a minor inconvenience. I walked out into the cool night air, closing the door softly behind me, and knew I would never step over that threshold the same way again. The street was silent, the only sound the faint hum of my own resolve as I headed toward the train station, bound for whatever came next. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, tucked above a deli that kept its lights on until 3 in the morning. The pipes groaned every time a neighbor turned on the tap, and the radiator clanked like it was in protest of being asked to work. My furniture came from yard sales and the curb on trash night. A chipped desk wedged between the kitchenette and the window became my command center. From that cramped space, I launched my idea, an online marketplace where boutique artisans could sell their work without being swallowed by the big e-commerce platforms. Potters in small towns, jewelry makers working from kitchen tables, painters with no gallery connections, I wanted them all to have a place where their craft was the focus, not lost in a sea of mass-produced junk. I built the site myself, coding late into the night, tweaking layouts and payment systems until my eyes burned. I sent emails to shop owners I'd found online, introducing myself and the platform. Most didn't reply. A few did, but their first question was always the same. Where did you study? When I admitted I didn't have a degree, their tone shifted. Some simply stopped responding. Others offered polite but final no's. Rent and utilities drained my small savings. I stretched meals by skipping breakfast, living on instant noodles and cans of beans. I took odd tech repair jobs from neighbors fixing a glitchy phone, untangling a stubborn printer to cover the cost of web hosting. One night, after sending out a batch of proposals, I checked my inbox. Another rejection, this one from a boutique in Vermont. The owner's last line read, "Maybe come back when you have real credentials." I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. The city noise outside faded into a dull hum, for the first time since leaving home. I wondered if my mother had been right that without the right paper hanging on the wall, I'd always be a step behind, but morning always came. And with it, another chance to prove otherwise. The next day, I packed my laptop and headed to a free small business meetup I'd seen posted on a community board, hoping the room would hold at least one person willing to listen. The seminar was held in the back room of a public library, its folding chairs arranged in uneven rows. About 20 people showed up, most in business casual, a few in paint-splattered work shirts. I sat near the back, notebook open, trying to blend in. The speaker was Marin Hollis, founder of a small but successful logistics software company. She wasn't polished in the way I expected her blazer sleeves were rolled up, and she spoke plainly, with the kind of authority that comes from surviving more than one failed launch. She walked us through supply chains, inventory tracking, and the hidden inefficiencies that quietly drain small businesses. After the talk, most people left quickly, but I lingered, working up the nerve to approach her. When I finally did, I nearly dropped my homemade business card as I handed it over. "I run a marketplace for artisans," I said, voice steadier than I felt. No degree, no investors, but real clients and real sales, at least. When I can get them. Marin studied me for a moment before asking, "Do you have customer data?" I opened my laptop and showed her my tiny but growing list of sellers, along with their order histories. She scrolled through the spreadsheets, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned back. "You're thinking too small. Selling one handmade scarf at a time is slow. But your order system, what if you sold that to 50 shops at once? Give them the tools, not just the storefront." Her words hit me like a blueprint snapping into place. I'd been so focused on attracting individual sellers that I hadn't considered turning my platform into software for entire retail networks. We spoke until the library staff started stacking chairs. As I walked back into the cold night, my mind was already rewriting everything: name, strategy, scope. By the time I reached my apartment, I knew the marketplace was over. The real business was about to begin. The pivot wasn't easy. I stripped my old marketplace down to its skeleton and rebuilt it as a cloud-based inventory and order management system designed specifically for artisan retailers. I spent weeks learning new frameworks, designing a cleaner dashboard, and integrating shipping APIs so store owners could track products from workshop to showroom. Days bled into nights. My cold call spreadsheet grew to over 200 names: boutique chains, regional cooperatives, specialty furniture stores. Most ended with polite rejections or no response at all. But one morning, an email landed in my inbox from the operations director of Eastwood and Pine, a New England-based artisan furniture chain with 14 locations. They were looking for a new system and wanted a demo. I barely slept that week. By Friday, I had a live demo loaded with their product categories, sample sales reports, and automated reorder alerts. The call lasted 45 minutes, but when it ended, the director said, We've been searching for something like this for years. Send over the proposal." The contract came in at $500,000 half up front. When I saw the signed agreement, I just stared at it for a long moment, my hands still on the keyboard, as if moving too quickly might make it disappear. Then came the real work. For 2 months, I pushed harder than I ever had, coordinating remotely with their managers, customizing features for each location, triple-checking every integration. I ate at my desk, worked through weekends, and sometimes fell asleep with code still open on the screen. The rollout went live on schedule. No crashes, no data losses. Within weeks, their regional managers were reporting faster turnarounds and cleaner inventory counts. Eastwood and Pine's owner sent me a handwritten thank you card, a small thing, but it felt like validation in ink. Not long after, they referred me to 2 other high-end retailers. Those introductions turned into meetings, and the meetings into new contracts. The revenue was more than I'd ever imagined when I was sitting in my cramped apartment building websites for single sellers. It was clear I couldn't do it all alone anymore. I hired 2 developers and a project coordinator, people as precise and driven as I was. For the first time, I had a team, and together, we were building something that could outgrow every limit I'd once thought I had. The contracts kept coming, and so did the numbers in my bank account. What had once been a few $1,000s a year was now more than I'd ever thought possible. But I kept my lifestyle the same. I still lived in the same modest apartment, still wore the same worn boots to client meetings, still drove a car with more miles than I cared to admit. The less my family suspected, the better. It wasn't about fear, it was about control. I didn't want my success to become another thing they could twist into something ugly. So when I decided to help them, I made sure it was in ways they could never trace back to me. I learned from a contact in town that my parents were months behind on their mortgage. Within a week, an anonymous educational foundation began covering their payments. They received a letter from the bank praising their contributions to local education as the reason for the assistance. My father told neighbors a benefactor had recognized his years of service. My mother called it divine timing. When my mother's thyroid condition worsened and the insurance wouldn't cover certain treatments, a private health trust appeared out of nowhere to pay for them in full. She never questioned it, only said she was grateful for the kindness of strangers. Victoria's children were next. She had enrolled them in an elite private school but balked when she saw the tuition bill. That fall, both children received academic enrichment grants from a regional foundation, covering their fees in full. She posted online about how blessed she felt to be supported by people who valued education. Through it all, they never stopped treating me as the dropout who had chosen the wrong path. At holiday dinners, they still compared me unfavorably to Victoria, still hinted I should think about finishing my degree. I smiled, nodded, and said nothing, but every time they praised their mysterious benefactors, I kept my eyes down and my voice steady, hiding the truth in plain sight. I told myself it was enough to know I was helping, even if they would never thank me. That illusion didn't last forever. One holiday, it shattered. The table was set as if nothing had changed, silver polished. Wine glasses lined up like soldiers, my mother's roast turkey placed at the center. I'd been invited like any other year, though I suspected it was more obligation than welcome. This time, I didn't come empty-handed. In my bag was a folder thick with documents, bank transfer records, trust agreements, company valuations, everything they'd never cared to ask about. Dinner began the way it always did, my mother reciting a toast to family, my father following with a speech praising Victoria's accomplishments, the children's test scores, and how blessed they were to have such shining examples under one roof. My name didn't come up once when the turkey was carved and plates were passed. I placed the folder on the table between the cranberry sauce and the rolls. "I think it's time you know the truth," I said. My father frowned as I slid the first document toward them, a valuation report placing my company's worth at $48 million. Next came statements showing mortgage payments from the so-called educational foundation, health bills paid by a private trust, tuition grants for Victoria's children. My mother's eyes narrowed. "Where did you get these? They're mine," I said evenly. "The foundation, the trust, the grants, they've all been me. For years." Victoria let out a short laugh. "So? What, you play with code at home and suddenly you're a millionaire?" "I built a company that serves clients across the country," I replied, my voice steady. "I've been supporting you all quietly because I didn't want gratitude. Just respect." "You're lying," my mother snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the room. I stood, tucking the documents back into the folder. "If you think I'm lying, then you won't miss the help. As of today, it's over." No one moved as I took my coat from the back of my chair. I walked out into the cold night, the sound of their muffled voices behind me fading with each step. By the next morning, I'd already booked the movers. My new address would be high above the streets of Manhattan, far from this table and everything it stood for. The movers arrived at dawn, their footsteps echoing through the near-empty halls of my apartment. By mid-morning, the last box was sealed, and I was on my way to Manhattan. The Penthouse keys felt heavy in my hand, not because of their weight, but because of what they represented: years of quiet work, of swallowing my pride, of building something they said I never could. When I stepped inside, the space opened before me like a horizon. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around the living room, the skyline sprawling in every direction. The Hudson shimmered in the distance, a ribbon of light cutting through the city. White oak floors caught the winter sun, and the walls were bare, waiting for me to decide what belonged there. That first night, I stood barefoot by the glass, the city lights below flickering like a constellation I could finally name as my own. I'd signed the closing papers months ago, but until now, this place had been just a property. Today, it became a home. Within a week, the new headquarters for my company opened on the top floor of a glass tower in Midtown. The office was sleek, bright, and designed for collaboration, with conference rooms named after the small towns where my earliest clients had come from, for the first time. My name was on the door, not hidden in an LLC, not buried under a shell company. I attended my first industry gala that month, shaking hands with executives, founders, and investors who had only known my work by reputation. No one asked about my education. No one measured my worth against a piece of paper. They measured it in what I'd built, and that was enough. Manhattan had always been the backdrop of someone else's story in my family's eyes. Now, it was the setting for mine, and I intended to write every chapter without asking anyone's permission. Success felt different when it wasn't just mine to hold. In the spring, I launched the Callaway Catalyst Fund, a grant and mentorship program for entrepreneurs who, like me, had chosen to build without the stamp of a degree. I wanted to find the ones who were quietly working in borrowed spaces, holding their ideas together with determination and borrowed Wi-Fi. The first grant went to a 22-year-old named Elena Reyes, who was developing a scheduling and patient tracking app for clinics in rural areas. She'd been juggling part-time jobs to keep the project alive, coding at night on a second-hand laptop that overheated every hour. The grant covered her living expenses, new equipment, and connected her with mentors who could help bring the app to market. When the announcement went public, the story caught more attention than I expected. Industry blogs picked it up, then business journals, then a feature in a national magazine. Headlines called me a champion for non-traditional founders and proof that the path less taken can still lead to the top. It wasn't about the praise, it was about the shift. Emails began pouring in from people across the country, each one a reminder that there were more of us out there than anyone wanted to admit. The fund wasn't just giving money, it was giving permission. Something I'd learned can be harder to find than capital. Standing on the balcony of my penthouse one night, I thought about Alina, about the other applicants still waiting for their chance, and about the younger version of myself who had needed someone to believe she wasn't wasting her time. That was when the call came, one that would reopen a door I thought I'd closed for good. 2 weeks after the fund's launch, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't seen in months. Eleanor's voice was softer than I remembered. "I'd like to see you," she said. just to talk. We met at a small cafe tucked between brownstones, the kind of place where the noise never rose above a murmur. She arrived in a simple coat, no dramatic entrance, no sharp glance. For a while, we just sipped our coffee. "I was wrong," she said finally. "About what matters. About you." I didn't rush to fill the silence. "I can't change how things were," she added, "but I'd like to know you as you are now." I set my cup down. Then it starts with respect. No comparisons. No conditions. She nodded. And for once, there was no edge in it. We parted without promises, but also without the weight of old resentments dragging behind us. That weekend, I hosted a dinner on my rooftop. String lights swayed in the evening breeze, the city humming below. My team laughed around the long table, and the first grant recipients shared updates on their projects. Plates passed, glasses clinked, stories overlapped. As I looked around, I realized this was my family chosen, not inherited, and in that moment, I knew I'd stopped living to earn a place at someone else's table. I had built my own.